Hello everyone, I'm Zura and today I'm here with a video that's meant mostly for the new or returning players in Lord of the Rings The Living Card Game. One of the questions that I see asked in the community from the new players, aside from the rules questions, pretty often are questions about factions. Which trait has the best decks? What are the playstyle? Which factions or archetypes do you recommend? So I'm here to quickly help you catch up with what every faction is about in extremely short amount of time. When explaining each faction, I will mostly talk about their playstyle as is the most relevant thing, but I will also display the packs I recommend to get when collecting the faction. I will show the key cards, try to deduce which player type the deck is for. And lastly, I will also display the estimated power level of the faction, which I divided into 3 tiers. Tier 1 being the top decks and Tier 3 being the underdogs. While obviously we can't judge a whole faction because you can build great and terrible decks in every single one of them, I believe you can reliably say how far can you get with a pretty standard build for it. So without further ado, let's get into the first faction. Eagles are one of the 2 very first trade decks that came into play in Lord of the Rings The Living Card Game. They're exclusively tactics, meaning that any deck running Eagles will have to be tactics heavy as well. Their main focus is the fleeting nature of majority of their allies. You either need to pay them to keep them in play, or discard them after use, or possibly their main value is also in entering and leaving play anyway. Their key cards are Eagles of the Misty Mountains and Eagles Are Coming. Eagles of the Misty Mountains allow you to keep getting value out of allies leaving play and helps you create an overwhelming ally to devour enemies in your way. And Eagles Are Coming is a single card that will completely allow you to refuel the tempo and allow you to focus on pressuring the board with Eagles coming in and out of play. They are not the most developed faction around and they tend to work better in multiplayer, but they are pretty solid with a clearly defined playstyle. ROHAN is the other of the first 2 developed traits, although its development spans the whole history of the game and it amassed a lot of cards fitting the theme. The stereotypical Rohan deck looks to amass an army of Rohan allies, helped by Theoden's ability to pay for them, and then preferably use a wide array of their sacrifice abilities. A big part of their allies either can be sacrificed for profit or triggers of other characters dying in battle for benefits. You can combo your allies even more by using cards like Goodwin or Gambling to keep cycling them in and out, stuck in a perpetual loop of death so you can keep on benefiting. While they do have standout cards like Theoden, who has occasion and economy for spirit, Gambling for the combo potential, or even Eomund for his incredible ability in the deck, I believe that Rohan decks can be weird enough that there isn't a single card that I feel belongs to every single Rohan deck, although it's probably smart to include one of those. Theoden, Goodwin, Gambling, both of the Eowens, or Eomer and Lothrelier combo. It is a faction for you if you like chaining combos, complex strategies, and sadly, constant struggle against the encounter deck, as Rohan is probably the faction that is currently the weakest. Dwarves are possibly the first faction that comes to mind when thinking of Lord of the Rings The Living Card Game, and for a good reason. Not only are they one of the most developed traits with whole 16 heroes at their disposal, they span across all spheres and have 2 separate strategies, both of which could earn a spot on this list. They were also developed pretty early on and were pushed way more than Rohan and Eagles. Dwarves have 2 important strategies that can be used together, but usually the decks are more focused on one of the 2. The first strategy being all about swarming the board with dwarf characters that can use the buff granted by Dane Ironfoot. This strategy benefits from an important dwarven mechanic, which are cards requiring you to have 5 dwarves on the board for benefit. For example, Tauren Oaken Shield, generating another resource after you pass the requirement. This type of deck used to be absolutely dominant, but its golden days are over. The developers have nerfed dwarves more than any other deck type. One card, being Erebor Battlemaster, has even been nerfed twice in the game, and now they are the shadow of their former self. The one card that needs to go in this deck is obviously Dying Ironfoot, but they also have some other important cards, some of which were sadly nerfed as well. Legacy of Durin is still okay card draw, but the nerf made it pretty boring. Narvi's Belt provides sphere spoofing that you will need in a Dwarven Swarm, and I believe that Nori is an incredible hero and one of the best choices, allowing you to maintain your threat pretty easily. With this deck type, you're looking to use cards like a Very Good Tale or Steward of Gondor and Legacy of Durin to maintain your economy and keep putting more allies into play, all of which have different abilities, not all really connected to the archetype. The second Dwarven archetype is about using cards like Sigilmidner, King Under the Mountain and Thorin Stonehelm to discard cards from the top of your deck and benefit from that. This is called the mining archetype. There are two cards that benefit from being discarded and various that interact with the discard pile like Erebor Hammersmith, Dwarven Tomb or To Me O My Kinsfolk. Those cards go very well with Hero Gandalf, that always allows you to see what you will discard with your dwarves. The mining decks go incredibly well with another version of Dying Ironfoot, who allows you to discard up to 3 cards around for a +3 defense bonus. Generally, dwarves are pretty basic, but their card pool is rich enough to make up for it, as well as the fact that those are really 2 decks disguised as one faction. You should like them if you enjoy the vast amount of options at your disposal, as well as the fact that you get to use the tools of all 4 spheres at once. Gondor is a faction that started developing with Hearts of Numenor era, but similarly to Rohan, it kept on growing slowly every cycle since then. Gondor decks are focused on 2 things, resources and allies. Its 2 most important cards, Boromir and Visionary Leadership, are global buffs that require a single resource in the hero's pool in order to work. It has a swarm focus, with global buffs benefiting from more allies and Citadel Custodian discounting himself, possibly to 0. Gondor is pretty firmly leadership based, with lots of resource related effects like Denethor, Wealth of Gondor, Squire of the Citadel or Sword of Numenor. Of course there's also Steward of Gondor, and it does get the job done in Gondor, but it's not any more important than it is in Dwarves, for example. When playing Gondor, you get your resources, your buffs, and you flood the board with allies, with cards like a Very Good Tale or even Erestor being very helpful in getting a lot of allies out quickly. Gondor also has a small interest in Valor mechanic, requiring you to be 40 threat or above to utilize it. A lot of its cards reference Valor, including Honor Guard, Defender of Ker Andros and the Red Arrow. Some also do reference it without using the Valor keyword itself. For example, Soldier of Gondor, Angbor the Fearless and Veteran of Osgiliath. And in a Valor Gondor deck, you may want to use Pillars of the Kings to get yourself to 40 quickly, and use effects like Favor of the Valar in order to stay safe. It's a faction I recommend if you like risky playstyle with Valor and you're interested in even more dedicated swarming than dwarves. It has a lot going for it and is one of the most developed and strongest decks. There is not much to say about Outlands. The men from provinces of Gondor are the easiest faction to pick up, essentially requiring you to only buy 1 pack to start playing them, with all essential pieces in place. Outlands are based around 4 core allies: Edir Swordsman, Knights of the Swan, the Herdsman and Warrior of Lozanarch. Each of those allies grants a global +1 buff to one of the 4 core stats to all other Outlands character you control. Essentially, every next Outlands ally you play will be better value, getting to use the buffs of all previous allies you played. They're simple to understand and use, but don't let yourself be fooled, there's no strategy involved. You still need to get them on the board somehow, and rushing it is probably the best strategy, with staples like Very Good Tale, which was mentioned way too many times on this list, and Steward of Gondor being able to speed you up the most. Also, prioritizing playing correct buffs will be your way to victory. Aside from the forementioned allies, there is also a hero in the fair, that makes it easier for you to amass your army, and there are also Hunters of Lamedon, essentially also accelerating you while providing with another character to use the buffs on. You will enjoy Outlands if you want a deck that's easy to build and one that you can build buying as few expansions as possible. They're very strong, stronger than most entries on the list, and I definitely recommend them. Sylvans are an incredibly fun archetype, similar to Eagles but way more developed and spanning across all spheres except of just tactics. Majority of Sylvan allies have an ability that triggers when they enter play. For example, Galadrim Minstrel will allow you to search the top 5 cards of your deck for an event, and Marksman of Lorien will lower an enemy's defense by 2. Because of that, you will want to utilize as many of enter play abilities as possible, and Sylvans have the tools to do that. They have a plethora of events like Elf Guide and Island Amid Perils, allowing you to return a Sylvan ally to your hand for benefit, and then replay them to get the value of their interplay ability again. To push this to the extreme, they use heroes like Celeborn that grants all Sylvan allies that enter play a stat boost for a single round, and Galadriel that will let your buffed allies that enter play commit to the quest without exhausting, also for a round. With cards like the Tree People and the Elven King, you will be busy playing the same allies over and over again to use their diverse abilities. Sylvans also have their own dedicated economy piece, Old Orient, making it just a little bit easier for you to pay for those allies. Recently, they got a real bomb in form of the Host of Galadrim, allowing you to replay all of your Sylvans for cost. They have quite a bit of room for experimentation when it comes to finding your third hero after Galadriel and Celeborn, with some of the better options being Thranduil, Grima, and Haldir. They're very developed archetype that works against a plethora of quests in both solo and multiplayer. They have a high skill ceiling, requiring a lot of good planning to use correctly, but when you do, they're certainly very strong. Ents are a specific but very thematic and powerful trait. All Ent allies have stats that are way higher than they should be for the cost, but they do enter play exhausted, meaning that you have to wait a single round until they decide to help you. Their most powerful cards include Treebeard Ally. He's incredibly overstated and allowing you to ready an Ent, including himself, every second round, or he can boost your economy. Some popular Ent strategies include Hero Leadership Faramir, as he allows you to overcome Ent's weakness and ready them the same round they enter play. It might be counterintuitive, but Ent decks are probably way stronger when they do not use Treebird and Quickbeam heroes, as their ally counterparts are way more powerful in the deck, and those heroes do not contribute much to the synergy. They also have synergy cards with being damaged, like Boomed and Trumpeted that readies an Ent and gives it plus 3 attack. Booming Ent that gets an attack buff for all damaged Ents, and Leaflock getting willpower bonus for the same thing. They are exclusively tactics and lore, which is very combat oriented combination, and you should expect a lot of sheer power but lack of flexibility. They are not the most developed faction in the world, but the sheer stats of their allies, combined with some tricks to ready them, will allow you to take on many scenarios, preferably in multiplayer, so others can help you cover aspects of the game Ents do not have access to. Dunedain decks are the definition of high risk, high reward. They tend to engage a lot of enemies at once, and maybe contrary to usual strategy used in the game, they do not always get rid of those enemies. A lot of their cards benefit from being engaged with enemies, even scaling with amount of enemies engaged, like Descendant of Kings readying amount of Dunedains equal to number of enemies engaged with you, or Hell of Valandil allowing you to reduce the cost of your next DUNEDAIN character by the amount of enemies engaged with you as well. They also have a plethora of allies encouraging this playstyle. You will want to use Forest Snare to keep those enemies engaged and not attacking at the same time. And you will want a lot of good defenders like Amartil and Guardian of Arnor, both of whom benefit from engaging enemies as well. You will probably be having a hard time in the early game before you can stabilize, but when you have a lot of defense and shadow control covered, you're going to be putting 3 DUNEDAINs into play with Her of Varendil, drawing a ton of cards with your Sarnford sentries and engaging even more enemies with Tactics Aragorn. They are an interesting and complex faction to pilot. I would only recommend them for multiplayer though, as it's so combat focused that redirecting any of your resources to questing or other aspects of the game could slow the deck too much. Thank you very much for staying this far. I originally intended it to be a one-part video, but due to videos taking a lot of efforts on my part, I decided to split this one and release the first set of factions first. Next time I will finish all the remaining factions. If you're a beginner, I hope I gave you some understanding of how different trade decks work, and if you have any questions you can ask me them in the comments. And if you're a long time player, maybe it was nice for you to hear a good summary of what all those decks try to accomplish. Thank you very much again, let me know in the comments if you want to see more of the Beginner's Corner, stay safe, and I will see you guys in the next one.